From the shifting shadows of imagination to the blinding light of terror, this is One Tale to Midnight.
When my wife Marissa and I first set foot in our Victorian house over 15 years ago, I felt an inexplicable connection to it. The structure, with its spires and arched windows that seemed to weep with age, wrapped around us like a pair of familiar arms. Built in 1890, it held a mysterious charm that called to us, whispering untold stories through its creaking floors and sighing walls. We built a life within those rooms, a life that thrived on shared dreams, whispered promises, and unwavering support. Marissa was the steadfast anchor that kept me grounded through the trials of my body's decay. Decay. It's the only way I can describe it. The last decade had been a whirlwind of surgeries and setbacks. 2 knee replacements, painful reconstructions of both shoulders, a ruptured disc in my lower back, and the fusion of 2 vertebrae in my neck. The house, once a testament to our youthful hopes, slowly became more of a cage as I learned to maneuver it with faltering legs and trembling arms. But no matter how dark the days became, she was there, my rock, my constant. Then came the figurine. Marissa found it one sunny afternoon in her flower garden, nestled among the purple foxgloves and the creeping vines of honeysuckle. She called out to me, her voice a mixture of curiosity and concern. When I hobbled to her side, I saw her holding a tiny porcelain figure. At first glance, it looked like a child's forgotten toy, weathered by time and dirt. But as she cleaned it off, the unsettling truth became evident. It looked just like me. Every scar, every blemish, every line that marked my skin was replicated in minute, almost impossible detail. The crooked tattoos I'd gotten in my youth, the knotted scar from a bicycle accident when I was 9, details so personal that even I had forgotten some of them, were there. Marissa's face paled as she held it up to the sunlight, her fingers trembling as if the weight of the figurine was suddenly too much. That night we sat in the study, the heavy velvet curtains drawn shut, a dim light casting long shadows that crept and danced along the walls. She examined the figurine with a magnifying glass, her gaze sharp and focused. I watched, equal parts fascinated and unnerved, as she traced its features with the tip of her finger. That's when I saw it, a scar on the figure's shoulder and another just below its rib cage. They were new. "Look at this, Peter," she whispered, eyes wide with worry. The silence in the room became palpable, pressing down on my chest like an invisible weight. A week later, fate unfolded in a way that cemented our fears. I had gone to the corner convenience store for a quick errand, something I rarely did now that my body had become an unreliable vessel. But Marissa was out, and we needed milk. As I approached the register, I heard raised voices, a heated argument that twisted the air like a taut wire about to snap. The young clerk, a girl barely in her 20s, was backed into the wall, her hands covering her face, as a man shouted and lunged at her. Before I could stop myself, I intervened. I grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him back, and in the chaos he spun around. A look of wild desperation in his eyes, and the flash of a gun muzzle was all I saw before pain exploded through me, once in the shoulder, once in the stomach. Darkness swallowed the world. I awoke in a sterile hospital room, the memory of the incident clouded by a haze of pain and confusion. Marissa was there, her face etched with worry, her hands gripping mine as if letting go would mean losing me forever. She wept as I told her what happened, nodding silently as if she had expected it all along. "Peter," she said after a long pause, her voice trembling, "I think we need to talk about the figurine." She explained that after I'd left for the store, she'd taken another look at it, unable to shake the ominous feeling it left her with. The new scars, the ones we'd only just noticed, matched the locations of my gunshot wounds exactly. And now there was another addition, a thin, jagged line across its neck that hadn't been there before. Our eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between us, one that was rooted in fear. The days turned into weeks, and as I recovered, I began to feel like a character in a twisted fable. The house, which once exuded a comforting familiarity, now seemed to harbor secrets. Shadows moved just a little too long when the lights flickered. Whispers seemed to coil up from the cracks in the floorboards, brushing past our ears with unintelligible murmurs. Oh, it was Marissa who first suggested we try to trace the origins of the figurine. We pored over old records, consulting town historians and collectors of oddities. But the figurine remained an enigma, a silent harbinger of something we couldn't name but could feel creeping ever closer. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself in the attic. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight as I rummaged through forgotten boxes and relics of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. That's when I found it, an old leather-bound journal that looked as though it had been hastily shoved between two beams. The handwriting inside was jagged and slanted, each letter scrawled with a sense of urgency. The entries spoke of a previous occupant of the house, a man named Jonathan Harker, an all-too coincidental name given its literary association. He'd described finding a similar figurine buried in the garden, one that mirrored him in every painful detail. His account detailed a series of misfortunes that befell him, each marked by a new scar or wound on the figurine. The last entry was smudged and barely legible. "The final mark has appeared. I cannot escape it. To whomever finds this, I am sorry." A chill ran down my spine. I was not the first. We were not alone in this macabre tale. Marissa was waiting for me at the foot of the attic stairs, eyes wide as she took in the journal clutched in my hands. The words tumbled out of me, each one feeling like a pebble dropped into the dark, still waters of our shared terror. The figurine sat on the table between us, its glassy eyes staring blankly ahead as if mocking us with its silence. As days bled into nights, we became prisoners of our home. The house seemed to feed off our fear, groaning and creaking as if alive, its wooden bones shifting in response to our whispered conversations. The figurine remained a constant presence, a reminder that something dark had taken root in our lives, growing stronger with each passing day. Marissa paced the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner counted out the seconds like a drumbeat to our growing fear. I sat hunched over on the edge of the couch, the journal splayed open on my lap. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting our shadows long and thin against the walls. "We need to get rid of it, Peter," Marissa finally said, her voice a mixture of determination and desperation. "We need to bury it, burn it, throw it into the river, anything to break this curse." I looked up at her, the flickering firelight catching the tears that glistened at the corners of her eyes. She'd always been the practical one, the strong one, but now even she seemed to be fraying at the edges. "I don't think it's that simple," I replied, my voice raspy and low. "Jonathan tried to get rid of it too. He buried it, and yet it found its way back to him. If this journal is to be believed, whatever this is, it doesn't let go." Marissa sat down next to me, her fingers intertwining with mine. I could feel the tremor in her hand, the only outward sign of the fear she tried so hard to suppress. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing down on us like the walls themselves were closing in. "What if we go to someone who understands these things?" she said suddenly. "An expert in the paranormal, someone who's seen this kind of thing before. There must be someone who can help us." I nodded slowly. It wasn't a bad idea. We'd scoured the local records and consulted the historians, but none of them had dealt with anything like this. We needed someone who understood the darker side of the world. The next day, Marissa made calls while I rested in the study, the figurine now wrapped in a cloth and locked in a small wooden box. I could still feel its presence, as though it pulsed faintly from behind the cabinet door, taunting me with the knowledge that it was still there. "I found someone," Marissa said when she came into the room. She had a piece of paper in her hand, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Her name is Eliza Moreau. She's a folklorist and a medium. She's agreed to come tonight." "Tonight?" I echoed, surprised at how quickly it had all come together. "Yes, She said she's familiar with objects like ours. Hours seemed to stretch and yawn as we waited for Eliza to arrive. Marissa paced, her footsteps tracing a path across the worn rug. I watched the fire and listened for any strange sounds from the box, half expecting it to rattle or burst open. A sharp knock at the door shattered the silence. Marissa and I exchanged a look before she moved to answer it. Standing on the porch was a woman who seemed out of place in our time-worn house. She was tall and slender, with silver hair that fell in elegant waves over her shoulders. Her eyes were dark and probing, taking in every detail as she stepped inside. "Thank you for coming, Miss Moreau," Marissa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Eliza, please," the woman replied, her tone calm but commanding. Her eyes shifted to me, and I felt as though she could see right through my skin to the bones beneath. "Show me the item." Marissa led her to the cabinet, unlocking it with a shaking hand. Eliza watched without blinking as Marissa placed the small wooden box on the table and removed the cloth. The figurine seemed to glow in the soft light. Every detail as perfect and chilling as the day Marissa had found it. Eliza leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she inspected it. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. A long silence followed, punctuated only by the creaks of the house and the ticking of the clock. "This," Eliza finally said, her voice low, "is not just a reflection of you, Mr. Hargrove. It is a tether." "A tether?" I repeated, my throat tightening around the word. "Yes. It binds you to something much older and far more dangerous than any mere curse. It is a conduit through which an ancient force seeks to anchor itself to this realm. Every mark on it is a mark on your soul." Marissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I reached for her, feeling the cold sweat on her palm as she clutched mine. "Can it be broken?" Marissa whispered, her eyes wide and pleading. Eliza's gaze shifted from the figurine to me, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in her eyes. "It can be severed, but only at great risk. And even then, it is not without consequence." I swallowed hard, the room suddenly feeling colder. "What kind of risk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "If we sever the connection, there is a chance that whatever force is bound to this object will turn its attention fully to you. And it will not be merciful," Eliza said, her eyes locking with mine. "But if we do nothing, the bond will continue to strengthen, and you will suffer the same fate as those before you." Marissa turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "Peter, we have to try. We can't just wait for it to happen." I nodded slowly. The alternative, to wait for death or worse, was unbearable. "What do we need to do?" Eliza set down her bag and began to pull out objects that seemed older than the house itself. A bundle of dried herbs, a small stone bowl, and a dagger with a hilt covered in ancient runes. The room seemed to shiver as she laid them out, and the shadows along the walls grew darker. "We must perform the severing ritual," she said, her voice taking on a cadence that resonated through the air. "It requires both of you, as your bond is the only thing strong enough to withstand the power that will be unleashed." Marissa and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between us. We would face this together, just as we had faced everything else in our 30 years of marriage. The room grew silent as Eliza began to chant in a language I couldn't recognize, the rhythmic sound filling the space and making my chest feel tight. She motioned for me to hold the figurine while Marissa stood behind me, her hands gripping my shoulders. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and the shadows that danced along the walls seemed to come alive, reaching out with inky tendrils. The figurine grew warm in my hands, vibrating as if it were trying to escape my grasp. "Hold it steady," Eliza commanded, her voice rising above the chant. The dagger glistened in her hand, poised over the stone bowl. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers, voices that seemed to come from the walls, the floor, and the very air around us. Marissa's grip tightened, and I could feel her shaking. The figurine began to glow, a blinding light that forced me to close my eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the room fell silent. The light faded, and the warmth of the figurine vanished. I opened my eyes to find the small figure now cracked and lifeless, as though whatever malevolent force had inhabited it was gone. Eliza lowered the dagger, breathing heavily, her eyes scanning the room for any lingering threat. "It is done," she said, though her voice held no triumph. Marissa hugged me, her face buried in my neck as the tension finally broke, leaving only exhaustion and relief in its wake. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse, as I looked at Eliza. She nodded, but her expression was still grave. "You must be vigilant. Such forces do not let go easily. If it returns, you must be ready." As she gathered her things and left us with our broken but quiet house, Marissa and I sat together on the floor, holding each other in the flickering light of the dying fire. Whatever had been haunting us was gone, at least for now, but the echoes of that night would stay with us forever.
Thanks for watching. One Tale to Midnight. Please like and subscribe.